I want to focus on this idea that one of the most important parts of your operating philosophy, your mission, is that over a 4-year journey, a student's needs, like what your school wants to provide to a student at any given time across that 4-year journey, is very complex. It requires a wide variety of skill set and emotional intelligence, relational capital, and the traditional school system treats that in artificial blocks of time where it's like this student is in this class with this teacher for this period of time, and whatever those students' needs are in total are supposed to be met by this teacher for however long they're together, and then they move on to the next one, next
Yep.
class, next teacher. And that is, to your kind of design thinking mission, that's a very imperfect, artificial, and suboptimal way to produce this product of an optimized 18-year-old, right?
Right. Yeah. And all of that is only measured in a single letter grade at the end of that course.
Right. So if you could talk about how you flipped that model upside down in your operating architecture in Notion to actually produce a better output, I would love to see that and hear that story.
Yeah. Okay. In some ways, this it can be a little bit uh, challenging to talk through this overall as far as what it looks like. But this is our, of course, our home page. Of course, has a Grackle on it because that's who we are. This is a single page, and speaking in terms of how this is set up, this is a page that actually has been new this year in terms of how we have functioned and used it. Partially because, and I'll talk through kind of the workflow for individual students here in a second, but um, as a singular view of a range of information as it relates to equipping teachers to be able to do their jobs, that has kind of consolidated over time to a single, for the most part, for a lot of people during the course of the day, a single page. At the core of it shows what our courses are. So anyone, this is a big thing for us, is that any teacher at any time can look at any other teacher's courses and see what is happening, who's in it, how they're approaching things, share resources. And so it's open in that visibility level. The information, our school calendar is maintained right here, and there's again, all of these are views of these things that are held in other places. But we have our calendar, the communications that we send out weekly to families. This area of things to know is actually, and I'll show in a second, is a place where teachers generate on a weekly basis information in a set of categories that they share with one another. Some of them have to do with just how they're collaborating together, how things are operating, things that are accomplished, things that need to be communicated to others. Um, um, and then meeting agendas, what we've actually tackled in our weekly meetings, will all show up here. And so this is kind of a reference point. This is information for quick access and reference. The resources
Can I
that are,
ask something?
yeah,
So in several of those toggles, there was no data at the moment. And I think that's because you're on spring break right now and you've actually
exactly.
cleared through everything.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. All
So
of those, yeah.
the
There's things
absence
that are
of,
empty.
yeah, that's a sign of good housekeeping in this particular situation. I just want to point that out.
Thank you. Yeah. The resources list on the right side. So this is from an assets database. One of the things that has evolved over time in our use of it, and I think you and I have talked about this before, is a consolidation of databases of assets and resources that we have at the school from um, multiple databases to singular databases that are actually consolidated and separated and categorized for usage. And so we have a single database that is by far our largest, that we call simply assets. That's what this is drawn from. And this this is a view of the assets that, and you have a couple of things, time sensitive ones, and this is related because we were actually just finished. We're starting a new term and we're launching a few different things. And so if there's a time sensitive item, I will simply mark that as time sensitive on the property, and it will immediately then move to this view up here in this place. All of these also have a check next to them so that of all of the assets, it has a check that it needs to be on the home page and then the subcategory of in what category it needs to be. So this changes over time. This is a little less prompt housekeeping because right now none of these are, these were all right before spring break, what we were looking at. The student information. So these are key databases that relate to what teachers need to be able to see. So that initial kind of contact information, seniors that have extra privileges, 4-year plans. I'll talk about that in a moment. All of these basically teachers need to access regularly in different points and be able to reference. We have an additional tools for work that are, some of them are databases, some of them are information, but they are specific tools that, again, teachers need to have at the ready and have handy and be able to use that. Information need to be able to, again, to come back to and see. This will change over time. This actually probably needs a little bit of cleanup in terms of what we have, but again, it's that information they need, and then if there's ever any particular kind of just for fun things, that's there. These assets that are down here are related to agenda items that had an asset that was important to it. And so as we have agenda items that need to basically, and this is what's one of the things that's great with this, is that if we have an agenda item that in the working through it, so our staff meetings are very active and collaborative and productive as opposed to informational, and I'll get to how that functions in a second. If we generate an asset or if we reference an asset, we can move an item from an agenda item into an asset that becomes a time sensitive resource through the Notion workflows it's set up here. And so both of these were agenda related assets or agenda items that became assets because they became related to the function of what we needed to be able to do.
Makes sense.
So, and I
so
think
an asset could just be a document, a tool.
Yes. Well, and I think one of the things that actually happens, like, we all have agendas. We all have meetings, work meetings, where we actually, in the context of it, either need to work on something, or in the process of that, we realize, oh, there was actually important business that was accomplished in that meeting. And the old way of thinking of it is, okay, well, it's in our meeting minutes, so I can go back to the meeting minutes and be able to find that. But that ends up being siloed in a place that is separate from being able to use that in the future outside of the context of that meeting experience. And so if we develop a preparation for spring that is going to be valuable for us every year going forward in terms of preparing for the spring agenda, there's no reason for us to have to hunt down into when did that meeting happen? Let's move that over. It instead becomes let's move that into and become a resource for the future that we then can actually put next spring as a time sensitive item to be able to access that. And so one of the things that Notion has actually helped us do is develop SOPs and resources that will help us in the moment and help us in the future, that makes it possible for us to be able to access those things. And actually, this progress report SOP is in some ways a good example. We have a way that we lead students through their progress reports. And again, it goes back to this mission thing. When we have students, when they get a progress report, they actually have to evaluate and reflect on their own work first. So they don't get a grade or a teacher response until they actually have been able to um, reflect on where they're at, what they're learning, what their goals are, and those pieces to it. And so you see some of that. And so we have this SOP that pops up on the time sensitive every 3 weeks, because we do progress reports every 3 weeks because our courses are only 12 weeks long. That allows teachers to be able to quickly access that. And if they're like, wait, I forgot actually how I'm supposed to enter progress reports or do these things, I have all of that. That's right there. In the context of a weekly meeting, if there's a question and there's something that needs clarification, we can improve that SOP right then and there, and have the advantage of that moving forward.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
You're describing a pattern that is critical and necessary for this whole thing to work, which is that through leadership, you build a culture in which people come to learn that spending time against your individual productivity in the moment
Mm-hmm.
for the benefit of organizational productivity or some future state in which somebody else is going to need to find that information is it you that has that concept
Mm-hmm.
has to be woven into the culture of the business.
That's right.
The habituated learning of fragmented SaaS tool ecosystem is there's no chance for this information to ever be corporately productive into the future. And so I'm going to do what's maximally productive for me in the moment. I'm going to put this note that's in my head in the fastest place for me to put it, which is probably a pushed Slack message.
That's right.
Or I've got this little alleyway inside Salesforce where I take my notes
Yep.
about my clients that I care about. And of course, then that sales rep ends up leaving and the new sales rep comes in and they're like, there's no context on this customer because that person had been taking notes wherever it made sense to them to take notes.
Yeah.
And so for any CEO, COO who is listening to this conversation, I just want to call out there's a subtle and critical assumption underneath what you're talking about, which is that you are setting up short hops to place information in a way that's going to be maximally productive for the company of Waterloo School in the future. But there are 1,000 individual decisions by your teachers that have to populate those channels of future productivity, and that forces people to act against what they've learned, which
Mm-hmm.
is this put it where it makes the most sense in the moment right now for me based on my pet tools I'm used to using or whatever. Like one of my clients, the VP of delivery, um, manages like escalation meetings for, projects that are going bad. This is just
Mm-hmm.
one of the things he does. And I saw him typing furiously in one of these meetings. And of course, we had set up a full Notion solution,
Yeah.
to manage those meetings. So I was like, hey, where are you putting all those notes that I see you typing throughout the entire meeting? And he basically has a multi-year OneNote, a Microsoft OneNote page
Oh my gosh.
that's been going for years. And he just types in the date at the top.
Yeah.
And so it's like all that mission critical intellectual property is going into one cloud note repository, and it's just because those are the patterns. That's
That's right.
like, you know that in the moment, I don't want to lose this idea, I've got to put it somewhere, turns into a multi-year OneNote. and, and
that
so
yeah, that is not accessible or actually projecting itself into the operations and culture of the company.
that's right. And
Yeah.
so what you've done with Waterloo and what I'm doing with my Scratch Advisor clients is we are very carefully orchestrating the least friction pathways for that critical information that serves the mission, that reinforces the values of how we want to talk about customers, take care of customers, build products.
Yeah.
We're creating those pathways to drop to populate and water those future stories, but it absolutely requires hundreds of people making thousands of in the moment decisions to recognize that, to believe it's more valuable than their personal productivity in the moment, and to act against learned behavior